relatively short introduction,
Okay,
just to place you for everybody and for the film mostly.
Oh,
but everybody has food, wine, anything you need before we...
Yep.
Ruth, you all set?
Good.
You ready to roll? Good. I'm brokenhearted that there's not more people here today, because there should be. Because this, actually everything we've been talking about was one of the fantasies I've had when I was thinking of the two of you coming here, because I've been sort of tracing all year long in the series people that are actually functioning as contributors to the community as well as doing their own work. And having run a reading series for as long as I did before this one, I remember suddenly realizing that nobody knew I wrote. I was just that guy that had a venue, right? And you two, both, I can introduce you both at the same time. The contributions that you have made, and you yourself, the library up there, for me, goes all the way back to when George Butterick started publishing those little Olson journals. And that was one of the first things. It was that, Credences, and Scientific America were the first three things I ever subscribed to when I was 20, whatever. And several issues into the Olson things, he started, if you recall, putting Olson's library, Olson's reading, in the back of that. And I poured through that again and again and again, just seeing what was there. And there was all these books out. You know, it was constantly, what's that? I've never heard of this or heard of that. And time passed, and there was this lovely event where this woman I met at Charlie's Tap, one of her closest friends was the librarian up in Salem at the Essex Institute. And she brought me up there, I met him, and we hit it off. He was a lovely man who handed me, he said, what do you want to see? And I said, God, he said, this is what you should see, and handed me the inscribed Moby Dick that they have up there. And then the two of them went off and left me sitting there shaking. Well, he went off and he took over from Butterick down at Storrs, and we went down to visit him again. And the reason I'm belaboring all this is that he and the young woman wanted to go off and actually get some time together and talk, and because they had something going on. And they left me in the library. And he said, don't screw anything up. Don't do anything you know you shouldn't do. But I mean, I could pull out the drawers. There's wonderful drawers if you've been down there, I assume, yeah. But what the reason I'm fumbling towards this is what I stumbled into was the library that's there. And I went and asked, I said, is it okay to look at these books? And he said, absolutely, that's what they're there for. And so immediately, you'll laugh, because what I did was I pulled every Duncan book I could find out, and the inscriptions in the front and the notes that he had taken were just, I mean, mind-boggling. So the contribution of bringing that library to us and Gloucester, and the ideas, everything we've been talking about before Tomas started shooting here, is a huge gesture of community that whatever happens, I mean, it's simply saving what Ralph Maud did, and you know, it's an extraordinary thing. And then what happens will happen. You know, we'll see. It'll be whatever community can form around this. But again, it's not simply that. You're doing your own work, and it's poetry that I have come across. I've known about you, and it's wonderful to be able to sit here and hear you read it, and to remember that as well as doing this, you are a poet, and at bottom, and this is an act on the particulars, right? That's the phrase of the first order, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, thank you, Michael.
Understood.
Thank you, Michael. That's quite an introduction. I appreciate it. I'm going to read from Work in Progress. Now, this is a work of fiction, you know, so the whole issue of poetry, that's, you know, poetry used to be a medium for poetry, for fiction. It no longer is, and that's, I guess, the area I'm working in. This is from Work in Progress. The narrator is on a ship. She's a navigator on a ship that's lost off the continent of Mu, the lost continent of Mu. She's writing home to her lover. And specifically what's happening in this segment I'm going to read is this takes place after a mutiny. There's a mutiny. The mutiny involved making a U-turn. Ships have to make a U-turn. They're headed towards a light that's receding, and for various reasons the decision's made to turn around, and there's a mutiny, And then, so this takes off from there. My text has 2 columns. So I want, what I'm going to read is in the right-hand column, and the left-hand column is a series of epigraphs, quotations to give some sense of the context, the reading context. Essentially, it's my reading that has informed this, this passage. So the passage I'm going to read some 50 quotes. I'm obviously not going to read all of them, but let me read 3 of them to give a little perspective on this. Okay, so the first quote is from George Pulte's The 36 Dramatic Situations. Quote, Gozzi maintained that there can be but 36 tragic situations. Schiller took great pains to find more, but he was unable to find even so many as Gozzi. This is Goethe writing in Conversations with Eckermann, quoted in George Pulte's The 36 Dramatic Situations. The next quote is from Ogawa Mohihiro, The Spirit of the Samurai. But this is in an art book that went to an exhibition of samurai swords at the Met a few years ago. Quote, representative of Sanjo swords is the famous blade known as Mikazuki, Munichika, crescent moon Munichika, a slender, deeply curved blade with a small kisaki point section. That blade has a hamon, tempering pattern, characteristic of Munichika's style, including ko-midare, compact irregular patterns, with a form of tobiyaki mixed with uchi-noke, separate areas of bright steel, said to resemble ocean spray, and fine irregular lines. The last one is from Cynthia Giles' The Tarot. This is a book actually that was recommended by Garrett, among others. Quote, pathologizing is the need of the psyche to express itself through symptoms of physical and mental disorder. The dark tarot trumps, the hanged man, the devil, the tower, death, the moon, symbolize these deformative processes. So I should say that the chapter I'm reading from, this larger work, each chapter is based on a tarot trump. This chapter is death, the 13th card. And so I'm reading from the end of that chapter. The death of Kodak, the handsome sailor and second mate, as he was explaining Avon's new poetry, provided the necessary shock for bringing psychological understanding to the captain in the aftermath of failed mutiny, given the absence of recognizable constellations in our Stygian sky. Captain Anna O's post-mutiny politics of sorcery and her refusal of revenge represented a becoming worthy of mythic ordeal that acknowledged the shipwide entrapment in the static and understood mutiny as a mode of therapeutic activity. Her self-transformative insight, which she communicated to the entire crew, and her new knowledge of nature's oneness with the cosmic process of psychic and spiritual renewal, identified the becoming schizoid of the ship as the work of nature's revolt, as a field of emergence that released the autonomous partial systems of its creative force through the hazardous demons of an alien/alienated sea cathected in the vessel itself, as if, in our hypomanic frenzy, rather than seeing, we had read the otherness of our environment despotically as underworld, and the misreading had been ritually repeated and intensified as the mutiny of prisoners on a demon ship from Zabalba. The magic moment, the moment of metamorphosis, came when Anna O understood that mutiny had not been a form of judgment rendered against the ship, but of healing. That the mutineers were not acting as judges, but as medics tending to a dysfunctional, malevolent vessel that was resistant to joy, love, and laughter, estranged from nature on a hieroglyphic sea. For this reason, Anna O ordered that the old purification rites be performed, starting with the jettison of Kodak's bones, in an effort to reset the ship's systems. The will to make shipshape proceeded with the naming of Wang, the third mate, as replacement for Don Juan, the chief mate, by having her recite the mantra Abrahadabra 3 times above a bowl of sparkling water by the gash in the bulkhead of the quietest room. which also confirmed her and Kodak's replacement by able-bodied sailors Nobodinos and Marlborough as second and third mates, respectively. By the same token, ordinary sailors Neanderthal, Thebes, and Rosetta chanted, "It is all good, it is all good," while being walked through the smoke and washed with the ashes from the mutoscope, like Pyongyang, Geryon, Escarlamund, and Boomer in Notes Toward a Love Machine Supreme, during their ritual appointment as substitutes for Möbius the Mapper, who hung unconscious upside down in the engine room, for Occam the Weatherman, drowned, and for Scardinelli, whose position as bosun was left vacant when Scardinelli became librarian after taking over for Socrates, who replaced Van Rubik at the helm. Van Rubik superimposed profile on the port side of the figurehead, like the spiral design of Maria's bones on the deck near the large collapse, were exorcised by ceremonies of mystic pantomime and by the processional display of the sacred Leohanna's flap and balancer, at the same time that the flaming scalp, the smiler stone, and the sock puppets of the quincunx were tossed into the sea. Further cleansing rites were devoted to the geoglyphic inscription of the tarot trumps along the Yonaguni shoreline, reproduced on the deck by the storm, and to the lingering effect of the crew's so-called big fart that occurred after our entry onto the Silver Sea. The exchanging of clothes, the festival of laughter, and the contest of abusive language and scurrilous jests, all of which culminated with the opening of the jars at the ship's bow and stern, and the sacrificial outpouring into the sea of the ouzo, which had become increasingly thin, sharp, pungent and astringent on the palate, like a wall of acidity with a musty, deeply unpleasant, vaguely chemical bouquet, and an insipid, lifeless finish that left a fizziness on the tongue. With the purification rituals completed, all ship systems were engaged to help steer the ship away from the light on a second go-around. At 12 o'clock, the self-guiding ship, responding to the supplemental action of the wheel and the steering oar, and to the extra power boost in the portside propeller, the fore and aft topsails, the T-gallants, and the Burtons, started turning away from the light. But at 3 o'clock, the ship once again continued to swerve on a starboard course, as if initiating a loop back toward the light. At which point, Captain Anna O forgot what she had understood. Psychologically, she blamed the sea for the ship's failure to maintain its new heading. In reaction, seized by the fury of her frustration, she invoked the Nazian's edicts and gave the order that the Wands of Clan be retrieved from the Power Knowledge Center, and that Neanderthal, Cabal, Thebes, Bedlam, Rosetta on the larboard side, and Scardinelli, Mach, Ben Kenobi, Socrates, Sony on the starboard side stationed themselves at the portholes on the sea-level deck in order to beat the sea with the wands and seal the beating with narrative lubes. Almost at once, Commander Express had a coughing fit, and Venus read the projection of his spit on the glass ingots as a bad omen. The beating and the narratives began nonetheless, and just as Bismarck started reading from the Book of Proper Distance, comparing Oceanic to Tarquin, the persecutor of mutability, the suppliant, Yorick, the executioner of Toby, who was friend to Tubal, the witness, Ham, the threatener of Thelma's rescue, 6 shooting stars passing overhead played the sounds of the mystic chord first heard by the legendary crew of the Prometheus, recorded in the claviculae of Screamon the Wise. Bismarck read on, while the sailors struck the surface of the sea with the wands, comparing Oceanic to Joe Schmo the Seeker, who drove Owsley off the cliffs of Theoria, Kung, the avenger of Redward, of the unexamined life, Sullivan, the culprit who betrayed Question Mark the Revelator, and defied Momo, the interrogator of nature's mysterium, Moroni, the wrongdoer, who confused 6 unseen, 9-tooth, Jeanette, the false innocent, who rejected Ray, the mistaken, Achilles of Egypt, the punisher in the great Irenic escape. As the ship approached 6 o'clock, however, it was clear that its course back toward the light was unchanging, to the consternation of the entire crew, including Vico of Communications, who was eager for a turn at the podium. So Vico, replacing Bismarck, stood up and read from the Tablet of Destiny, blaming Oceanic as Cody, the jealous one, who inveighed against Jimmy the Ink, his partner in temporary crime, in retribution for Orc's mistake. Lilith the vanquished, who succumbed to Eve the victorious. Gutenberg the immortal, whose life was a poem difficult to understand. At which point Congo interrupted Vico to read from the Book of Writing. But as Congo got started, a meteor shower filled the sky with the serial sound of descending 5-tone musical lines. So here's the experimental part of this. A sharp, A flat, G flat, E flat, D flat. Sorry. Nevertheless, so those are stars, huh? Nevertheless, Congo was thrilled to read on, while the crew's beating of the sea grew faster and more intense, and the sound of shooting stars cascaded in the same descending pattern. Commander Express coughed up again, and again Venus read the projection of his spit on the glass as a bad omen. But Congo only became more excited and continued to read, comparing Oceanic to Wittenberg the unfortunate, who suffered Wanasee the fool, Orial, she of the tree, who pursued the single vision and was confronted by deja vu Thors. Kukafa of Bohemia, who was framed by Lord Elgin. Hermes, the beloved enemy, who faced Abdul al-Hazred of Beauport and Thula, the Patagonian. Jafar, the bold leader, who stole the Book of Memory from the companions. The 10 sailors who whipped the sea with the wands, transported by the pentatonic sounds of the shooting stars, started shouting, "Kai! Kai! Kai! Kai!" back and forth to each other, in a rhythmic call and response from port to starboard, while Congo continued to read, comparing Oceanic to Johnny the Angel, who harassed the lovers of Shax, Albemuth the Abductor, who released Megalosaurus from Van Gelder the Guard. I, Araby of Sandover, Oniocritic of the Troubadours, Bartleby the Epocht, who resolved the Puritan enigma. Yet as Express coughed up again, and Venus again read the projection of his spit on the glass as a bad omen, the sound of the shooting stars suddenly dropped into a lower register and started moving in an upward series of pentatonic scales instead of rippling down. On both sides of the ship, the abrupt change of sound broke the rhythm of the whipmasters, who quickly fell into a high-spirited free-for-all. Kai, 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 inciting Sinbad, the steward engineer, to displace Congo and take his turn at the podium. As Sinbad stood up, however, to read from the Book of Unknown Nature and compare Oceanic to Tawil, the beloved, who abandoned Tweets, the lover, an insight was offered by Bo-Utsuri, the spirit of the keel, who identified the sound of the ascending shooting stars. As elements of a music of the spheres emanating from the 36 black keys on an orchestral keyboard. According to the law of unintended consequence, it must have been Bo-Utsuri's information quantum concerning the 36 orchestral black keys that entered the mechanosphere and provoked the astrophysical change of harmonics at 9 o'clock, when the arpeggio of Screamon's mystic chord was sounded again, this time in stereo by 6 pairs of shooting stars. The heavens fell silent, and realizing her psychological error at last, Anna O ordered the crew to stop whipping the Silver Sea. While the ship continued sailing toward the light on the horizon, Captain Anna O explained, quote-unquote, that the wheel had rolled, unquote, and that she remembered now what she had understood before but forgotten, that her neurotic obsession with an alien sea was symptomatic of a static concept of mutiny and a pre-mutinous binary of, quote, fact and fantasy, poetry and sci-fi, unquote, traceable not to her association with the sea, but to her repressed connection with a ship under, quote, absolute control of the death drive, unquote. Uncannily, as soon as the order to stop had been given, as if to confirm the cosmic dimension and the crew's desire for the emergence of unexpected connections, fortunate mediations, and unforeseen recreation, in contrast with the distressed energetics of a will for control, Commander Express coughed up again, and Venus of Intelligence read the projection of the spit on the glass to signify that the solution for sailing away from the light was to put the ship in reverse. As we once again approached 12 o'clock, the captain, mindful of the omen, gave the order to sail full speed astern. Cowabunga was thus dispatched to the step mill and Tarzan to the treadmill, on which they climbed and ran respectively, rerouting power from the Antikythera recycling assemblage, located under the crosshatchings of the Skull Gallery, to the gas lamp, parasol, love gasoline, sex cylinders, waterfall, sieves, and warhols on the Android open source operating platform. But to no effect. The engagement of the ship's no motor into reverse was stalled. O Itame, the new spirit of the keel, likened the situation in the Skull Gallery to a pegirocracy, in which the Royal Reserve Data Bank was issuing treasury obligations and validating dollar assets leveraged on leprosy. It was not until Commander Express coughed up again that the key for getting the ship to move backward finally came to life. Venus read the spit as a sign that Tarzan and Cowabunga should switch roles, with Cowabunga taking his place at the treadmill and Tarzan hers on the step mill. Subsequently confirmed by Oitame, the rearrangement, in effect, reversed the male-female symmetry that assigned gender-based positions to the whipmasters, with the men, Scardinelli, Ben Canopi, Socrates, Sony, Mach, on the port side, and the women, Neanderthal Thieves, Bedlam, Rosetta, Cabal, on the starboard side. Additional commentary from the most recent spirit of the keel, Midare Utsuri, explained that in order for a fundamental classifications of values to cohere, sexuality had to be put in its place by woman, for woman, through the actualization of her twofoldness. Because revolution remembers that it is a woman, and knows that death has the rapaciousness of sex. Revolution resuscitates the mutilated feminine of man, of his enslaved tenderness, as a virgin without body or sex, from which spirit alone profits. And this spirit creates the natural revolt of things that have heretofore been badly managed, and teaches us, with the natural force that will drive each of us mad, that the revolution we are unable to make, the universe will make for us. Anna O reacted at once and took Express's advice about switching exercisers on the treadmill and the step mill. And soon Cowabunga was walking fast, starboard side, and Tarzan was climbing hard, larboard side. As the ship's systems shifted into realignment, we began to move backward, pulling away from the luminescence on the horizon. A great cheer went up on deck. Devon, the poetess, who had continued to mouth a poetry of cryptic sounds that no one understood since the death of Kodak the Exegete, broke into wordless song. The smooth sailing, however, was short-lived. There came a jolt, and the grinding sound of sand scraping the hull as the ship ran aground on the shoals on which we still find ourselves battered now by different waves from all directions. Natural payback, says the captain, for striking the sea with wands. A symposium is planned, during which the cardinal points will be situated and new constellations imagined. The hope is that by mapping the heavens, we will discover the guiding spirit to enlighten us and deliver us from our plight, like the time travelers in Death and Philosophy, waiting for Godel. The hope is that my love will find its way to you, while your love lives on in me. Thank you.
Wow.
I'm glad somebody laughed, you know.
One forgets that it's okay. This also reminds us why Plato threw us all out of the Republic, too. So I'll go on with my testimony here for Mr. Boughn. In addition to his work, also delivered to our community, and I can testify for myself, the great treasure of the H.D.Book, which the first year I went to Portugal, this is back in '92, there were several people from Buffalo there, and Mr. Berthoff being one of them, and we were sitting in cafes, and every time I had him by myself, I kept saying, "So what are you doing? And the complications that he was dealing with in his mind were they were insurmountable. And so I remember walking away thinking, this has to come out. This has to come out. What's going to happen? So the treasure house that you have given the poetic community, but with the editing of that, which I certainly had, and as you know, everybody, the second you put these things out, oh, you should have. Never had that feeling. It's just a wonderful thing to have in front of me, having desperately gone out and tried to find all those little parts in books, hearing him read pieces of it, and to do that and to continue doing what you have in your hand there. Again, this brings us back to why you're here, the act of the community, and the beautiful gestures that you have given to us in that realm. Thank you, Michael. Michael Boughn.
Jesus, I haven't been in mind what to do. Figure it out, eh?
Yeah.
So, thank you. And don't forget that all began when Victor Coleman and I typed up all of the, like I was banned from the poetry room for being bad. I'm still bad. But, you know,
there should be a reunion of everybody who was banned.
Yeah, right. And Victor Coleman and I happen to have a collection of all of the Xeroxes of all of the little press publications from the H.D.Book, and which were a lot. And plus, I had worked in the poetry collection, and Lisa Jarno had photocopied all of Duncan's manuscripts of the H.D.Book and given me a set, which I'd actually forgotten about. I had it in my files. And Victor and I got together. I didn't know Victor at that point, and he says, "Hey, I got an idea." So he typed up all of those little magazine pieces, and we put them on a 3.5-inch floppy disk. This would have been in like the 90s, before there was easy access to the internet. And we mailed them out to, I don't know, 50 people or something. Then we said, copy it and mail it, and the whole thing just went viral, and everybody ended up with like this, which was it was a corrupted copy in the sense that it didn't include the changes that Duncan had made after he had published, which were pretty extensive, well, not extensive, but in some cases it was extensive. But anyway, that was the beginning of it. And it was because of that, we had that. Actually, you know what happened? Victor posted it on a website in Toronto for the Center for Contemporary Canadian Art as a frontier price, which it never was. He put it up like that. That was his rationalization. And turns out that Rudolph downloaded it and copied it and submitted it to the University of California as the manuscript. Now, what had happened was that the University of California then contacted me because I had sent them the manuscript and said, hey, it's yours, do what you want with it. We just want to see it in print, you know. They asked me to be a reader. And I had copies of all of Duncan's manuscripts, so I was able to see that what had happened at that. He had just, it had included none of Duncan's changes. Anyway, so that was, and then they gave it to me. So it was like I was sort of doing that, but it all starts in a sort of dispatches period. We're gonna publish the damn thing, you know. And it's part of a lifelong relationship to HD that I've had that started in 1968 when Robin Blazer, I was a young 20-year-old draft dodger in Vancouver, and Robin Blazer that was my first class I walked in. After some time in the bush, I enrolled at Simon Fraser and walked into this class, and it was Robin Blazer teaching Charles Olson. So anyway, man, and you talked about that experience at where you got to read Creeley and Olson in some course.
Well, not exactly, but yeah.
I mean, there was probably no other place in all of the world at that moment where anybody was teaching Charles Olson in 1968. Well,
I went to San Francisco State. They were doing nothing with Olson or Duncan.
Yeah.
I was appalled.
Yeah. It was just purely fortuitous, you know, or I don't know, maybe it was angelic intervention or something. But he handed me the three copies of the War Trilogy, The Walls Do Not Fall, Flowering of the Rod, and Tribute to the Angels. And I photocopied them and bound them in rice paper and carried them with me. And then, anyway, one thing led to another, and through the years I always had those poems, and then I got to Buffalo for grad school and ended up doing the H.D. bibliography, and then the H.D.Book, and then this, which is what I call it a grateful thinking, a kind of grateful thinking brought to attention through her words. So it's the relationship of the two books is that my book inscribes itself on the physical form of H.D.'s book. That is to say, each stanza has the same number of lines and there's the same number of stanzas in each poem. But the relationship between them is it's complex. Like, I'm not just doing an homage to H.D. I'm actually in a kind of conversation with her. And I thought I would start off with one of her poems. This is a beautiful book. The guy he tips these pictures into every book, but he doesn't distribute them. It's like he likes making them books, but you can't find it anywhere.
I was going to ask because I went looking.
Yeah, it's hard. Well, I got some. Here. The reddest rose burns smoldering in doorways scarred by ill-considered openings into blue extension of the abyss. Salvation ponders the next move in patterns unable to settle reasonable stretches of enchantment into desire's subdivisions, repeated endlessly, encasing space formerly known as earth in thick asphalt sock while erasing shadows hidden knowing. When she came, darkness congealed around her tail, apparently part of entangled garden, perennially reaching down to tap the rich wealth of matter blooms with refusal's harsh shapes. So that was my poem. This is H.D.'s poem. Saint Anne is the last door. Maugy, Cybele, they once called her the grandmother. And where are we now? Certainly there is a rush, the fervor, the tramping of the lush grass, the bare feet entanglement, the roar of the last desperate charge, the non-escape, the enchantment, the tremor, the earthquake, nothing, nothing, nothing more, nothing further. The pine cone we left smoldering in the flat dish is flaming, is fire, no before, no after. Escape? Who can escape life, fever, the darkness of the abyss? Lost, 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 the last desperate non-escape, the reddest rose, the unalterable law. Is it you? Is it some thundering pack of steers, bulls? Is it one? Is it many? Voices from the past, from the future, so far, no further, now total abasement. Were you ever here? Were you ever in this room? How did I endure your presence, and afterwards, just once, in a strange place with others there, silly talk, mine, and you wouldn't drink our wine? Then fruit juice? Yes. And you wouldn't touch our salt, almonds, pecans. What happened? You were so late. Why didn't you come sooner? Why did you come at all? Why did you come to trouble my decline? I am old. I was old till you came. The trouble with time continues, a tale of turbid abasement in hands of the decline of meeting zones. She entered through cascading angels' names, storied footprints, encrusted sand, lit the space so shadows could mask signs of previous encounter with secret forms just beyond flame's reach in lightless corners, crevices of forgotten connection to other words of love, inextinguishable flicker of loins, imagination's touch, a meeting zone of exquisite age and intimate conflagrations in different stories of how it burns and burning releases, spreading delta of time's pooled shadow where lingers, refuses to settle but stays put. Where the world is, heaven is too, proposes dubious reverence when bodies sprawl bleeding in every direction, visible to angular glance. Charnel house, another indication of flesh disguised as fact, a weapon of immaculate mass destitution, deadly thought links, carnage and tacos and web, attested from distant dates, yet to be found in calendars, more attuned to the sound of gunfire in cafes. Did she know of Crucible's cross hidden in its shadows? No one gets out alive is no answer when burnt flesh instead of resin and pine recalls the glory days of brutal civilized march. Opening where the rose should go, the bodies won't quit piling up. Anonymous in the earth of reckoning, causes eyes to quaver, blink against acrid smoke of immolated children. Two natures, three essences sounds good, but risks ridicule in zones chastened by false, empty branches as a sign of prophecy's blunted edge, where unruly trees are forbidden to reach beyond barren, which stands in for too real to mean. In the meantime, beauty and valor sell cheap in the market, and magnitude clings to simple words she enters through. I have seen what I have seen, air astir, faint wing blur, flash of amber. She comes and goes as pleases passage of light and dark across folds of blank. Fill it, however, mood leads reeling night through it. Scratch, scratch, more lightning at eye's edge, then, and it all falls into cubit and L, a plunge of familiar denouement, an all too human distended moment of in's rest, a final understanding, no, swell, though flashes of light are not its augury, and it's always one step out of sync leaves prepositions flailing. Scratch, 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 having seen what having seen has seen is good enough for its longing. There's a kind of mixed address to H.D.'s poetry here. That a lot of the stuff that I'm writing about is going back to the War Trilogy, which was just an astonishing book for me. And if you don't know this poem, she's in London when the war breaks out, and everybody says, go back to Pennsylvania, get the hell out. And she said, no, I'm staying. So she stays through the Blitz, and it's that classic situation of they go out to see if they can find some groceries in the morning, and they come back and the house next door is gone. It's just gone, blown up. I mean, that's the daily reality of it. And in the midst of this, she's visited by angels. They come to her, and she sees them in various forms. And one of the forms that they appear to her in is these amber eyes that peer out. And she doesn't know through much of the poem whose eyes those are, but they are eventually revealed to be the eyes of Azrael, the angel of death. And part of the work of the poem is coming to terms with Azrael in the midst of this carnage that's going on around. Anyway, so there's a lot. That poem was huge for me. This poem had to do with the breaking into her life when she was in her 70s of this erotic energy. I don't know what you would say. She was she was getting an award, for Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Academy of Poets or something like that. And she was at a table with St. John Perse, and as she was going in, he was also getting an award, and as she was going to sit down, she tripped, and he grabbed her and stopped her from falling and helped her find her seat, and it just something opened up, and it opened up these experiences that she'd had earlier in her life with, again, figures that were in some dimension human, but there was no explanation for them being there, doing what they were doing. They weren't there. She had these encounters throughout her life. Adrift in angels' names, footprints over crusted dunes, excess of savage rose, and common acts of knowledge wrested from morning's confusions of light. Egypt is a state of mind, and its perplexity concerning the object conceives what we are aware of in terms radiant energy and even splendor bring to the table, unless initiate interpretations are out of bounds, leaving impending baptism in the Nile transformed into just another dunk in dirty water, and cataphatic descants to Dogtown's ancient stone eruptions disconnected and dumped into bargain basement bins to be picked over and discarded by connoisseurs of fine poetic theory. A mouthful of light so the dead can speak. Demand not just to be heard, but to be loved with ardor, and declarations of interdependent lexical playgrounds, teeter-totter signs, unyielding debt to fragrant gifts. lavender perhaps, or lilies drugged air, word game loosed among excited connections. Snakes glide in through consideration of forms of Cretan worship, and entangled chthonic burrows voices of the dead. Amber eyes peer out of night's mask, nameless, till she comes, and the desert blooms, phantasmagoric colors, exuberant thirst slaked, riot across brilliant land of unexpected sign, exorbitant eyes to decipher. First owls, then snakes, points departure into form, taking reach in finely jointed stride, spine still given in depths or corners, forgotten, but never far from any stumbled over revelation. Here, just around that turn, where desert blooms into forms, flame slithers out of darkness under the fridge in the old man's battered kitchen. Banded coral, black and white to keep, he said, the rattlers out. Wonders, mothers, take you wandering through. Blooming wastes after rare rain, the kitchen, a temple, the old man, priest to powers, still nested in filthy linoleum corners, banded king snakes patrolling threshold of snake thoughts that slither and lick, flames consuming orange caress. That's for Billy Chernikov. You know Billy Chernikov?
What?
Man.
I should.
Yeah. Do you know her? She's connected to Robert Kelly, I think. Like she's in the Berkshire somewhere. And yeah, it's really, really important work that she's doing. I'll wrap it up. This is from the last books. What multitudes you can contain riddles the fabric of untold deflections with radiating starlight, star bright star of day I see tonight, words to that bewildered end, suggesting the terminus is up for grabs, at least as far as the edge, which explains angels' names as a condition of many conjunctions strung out toward a romance of serpentine challenge to compulsive righteousness, anxious to be rid of beauty. Bombs fall next door, amber eyes peer, torn flesh riddled through and through with puzzled intricacies of languages once spoken in distant myth. The point has been a question mark on the facade of winter, interrogation of love's inscribed obligation on the mausoleum lintel all along. Archaeologists of morning know the longest night swallows questions whole, even as the road devours itself, winding in and out of signs of hidden entrances, restricted visibility, opening the next curve past here. Where do they come from? Not so much the angels as the fragrant portals, signals conceived in alien heat of astral congress, scattered across the sky, hidden entrances in a world of restricted visibility. Where is here? Also asks the longest night, what's the plan? And promptly sinks into a lightless maw. 9 months later is one answer for what's next, though the question is missing amid aisles and aisles of duplicate product. The next hidden entrance resembles a story or war, angels and scattered foot tracks over dunes toward ancient casualties, the scent of water. Such is the way of points, unpredictable conjugal attractors drawing near as you approach the middle of the last bridge. to hold in mind begin and end adrift in turbulence, not knowing's churn till upon us is a prepositionless midst full of longing. Dark matter everywhere, thick as due time, subject to figure eruptions, the rose sauvage and rumored unions of more than expected combined force, in fact, a whole new expansion into moments of unbearable green and blue, radium blue, she said, each word lit with death glow. Getting to the end of intact mind requires cartological help. Stars, angelic names, lost or yet to be discovered lands in articulate shades of green and blue. Period is a term overhung with wild roses, delivers captivated measures onset. Bird call in the heat of a still morning, answered by distance into which another pours, the exact rhythm of sun's passage marking song spilled in rare fragrance across the day's face. Thank you. Okay, questions?
The meaning of life?
Yeah, 43. Yeah. Isn't it 43 or is it 42?
It's 42.
And speaking of which, since I'm seeing you back there, this is your last videoing for us.
Yeah.
And, it's been 2 years,
Well,
and I thank you, my friend. You know,
Yeah.
it's been
yeah.
wonderful to have you. He said he's going to teach me. If he
You
just,
can do it.
if his disdain for my computer skills can be.
I don't know about that.
Anyhow, thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
And thank you, Michael,
Thank you.
for doing
Yeah.
this, you know? This is exactly the kind of audience you want, one that listens.
Oh,
It's a wonderful room.
Yeah, it is.
Well, both these readings were extraordinary.
I know.
Well, you know what, Andre and I was going to tell you, Andre and I are oneers, both oneers in the sense that he has written the one sci-fi poetry epic ever written. He's written it. I don't think there's another. And I've written the only post-Lucretian faux micro. So,
Microepic.
Post-Lucretian
faux micro epic.
faux micro.
Oh, those again.
Yeah.
Well, if I may say so, I mean, I couldn't follow everything. They were both so rich, but I mean, they both have something to do with the positive forces of destruction, I think.
Mm.
And I was thinking that too, because George Quasha, you know, who was sorry he couldn't be here, just sent me an essay that he's writing on Jonas Mekas, his poetry and his films, and talking about the one piece that he did on destruction as a positive force. And it's divided into 4 parts, and one of them, for example, is the destruction of the Berlin Wall.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you mean by destruction as a positive?
yeah.
Do you know?
Well, I have it in my pocketbook, but I don't want to quote it
Well,
after that reading, but I think
wouldn't he be
that it's restorative, it's healing,
Yeah, well, I
it's,
mean,
you know.
I was thinking, because with Duncan, you get the same, I think the same thing with man's fulfillment and order and strife, and that whole notion, and which goes back to Freud and the in civilization as discontents, right?
But it goes back to Duncan's sense of what is, too, right?
Yeah.
That destruction, everything is all mixed up, and it's all, everything has, we want to divide it, but you can't divide it, because there's the creative aspect of destruction. Kali.
The confrontation
Yeah.
of that in the late 60s and early 70s, you know, when we're all out, you know, yelling peace, and
Yeah.
Robert's saying, this is part of you as well.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do with that is the question, you know, and
Yeah, absolutely. That was his big argument with
Levertov.
yeah.
Well, What was that? Can you?
Unfortunately.
Well, he got in a big argument with Levidoff because he felt that she wanted to moralize the situation.
Well, even more than that, the question was, at what point do you become the torturer?
Yeah.
That was the question.
Yeah, that was really.
If you have explicitly in your poem, described what you're trying to give testimony and witness to, and there's a tipping point where you become, part of that, and you are part of that already as well. But how are you addressing it? What are you doing with it?
That's right.
But it depends on the point of view, which is why I always disagree with them, if I may say so. I mean, and I still think, her war poems are really underrated.
They are.
They're some of the most humane, actually, poems of hers and of our time. And they're beautifully written. They're not sentimentalized. I mean, sometimes they.
Well, he wasn't talking about sentimentalizing.
No, I know. He's talking about it, the kind. He said she was entering into the sadism. I don't think so. I think sometimes, if you don't demonstrate, if you don't illustrate what's out there, then people can't experience it, and how can they know, and they'll feel it less.
It was a great argument, and neither party was completely right or completely wrong. But the argument itself brought out issues that nobody else was addressing, and and that's what's so important. That was about it, I think.
But don't you think it has something to do with point of view? I mean, for what reason are you bringing these images forward?
Well,
are you titillating? Are you trying to horrify? What are you doing, and why? And I think that really makes all the difference.
Yeah.
And there's the contradiction of Robert's own war poetry as well. But I mean, it'd be an interesting. We should do this. We should.
I'll be Denise. Yeah.
Sure, but we should read the poetry, not the discussion, and just let the two sit there and sing alongside of one another.
I would love to read her war poetry
because you
people
caustic
always
people.
dismiss it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, she shouldn't be dismissed by any means.
But they dismiss that aspect of her work more than they do anything else.
Well, H.D. was dismissed.
No, that's not because of Duncan, though.
No. But I think they should be given their due.
Oh, I
don't think
agree
they
with you.
have.
I think that would be a fabulous conversation to convene.
Yeah.
And the amber eyes, you see, I was looking up at the floor, and ever since Garrett died, I have this sense of him kind of looking down, which and directing people in places they should be going to. And I don't really believe that, but I experience it nevertheless.
Well, then you should believe it.
Don't deny your experience.
Well, I mean, intellectually,
I mean,
my intellect and my experience are divided at that point. But at the memorial, I felt almost as if Garrett was up at the top of the.
That's because he was, Ruth.
Okay.
In some form
But I
or
was
other.
looking at the eyes and thinking about Garrett, and then you read Amber Eyes, and I thought, now, how did these eyes get all that blue around them? What was that part of the finishing process there?
Well, that's actually from the original nails. These are made. This is reclaimed wood from some warehouse up in Maine that they took down. It was 18. The guy said 1850 something. I don't know.
Beautiful.
And then they saw them, and that's where so that's the minerals from the
minerals
nails.
from the nails,
Yeah.
fantastic.
So these are amber eyes now, is that correct?
Yeah.
But how did this design, was it on it?
Oh no!
No.
That
You did that after.
I did that. Yeah.
It's incredible what you've done here, really.
Thank you.
You know, they went after H.D.
Yeah.
because she wrote poems about Angel. But
And my take on HD is that it's exactly what you said, because how can I put this? It's your experience, and we're pushed to ignore that experience by the intellectual side of us, and whereas you're presented with those people over and over and over
they
again.
used the magic word fact.
Yeah,
You know, to sort of negate it all. But what H.D. said was, she quoted John in the New Testament.
Yeah.
I, John, saw, I testify.
Yeah.
I have seen what I have seen.
Mm.
You know, what can you do?
Well, it's
Well, in thinking about Garrett, I've been thinking of my favorite Hindu saying, things go where they are wanted. What harm is there in that? And that's been a solace to me many times. I've been thinking about that in the way that Garrett is sending people raying out in various directions, thinking about the things we've been talking about. And what
It's
might
true,
happen.
and that's absolutely right. And it's not like you have to, if you ever read, H.D. wrote these novels, some of which are now published. I think it's called The Sword Went Out to Sea. Do you know this book?
No.
It's really an interesting book, and it's based on, she did a lot of seances during the war, and one of the players was Lord Dowding, who was the head of the British Air Command, the defense of England. Anyway, and she had these experiences during the seances that she works into this novel. The novel is about this whole period of all this that happened. And at some point in it, she says, I don't know whether it's true or not. All I know is that I had this experience. This is what happened to me. I can't give you a cosmology, this debate that will verify the factuality or this thing. All I know is this is what happened. You know, this is what I heard. This is who spoke to me. And if Garrett's speaking to you, it doesn't matter where that voice is coming from. You know, it's he's speaking to you.
By the way, Breyer's novel about this unnamed country where a war takes place, you know that?
I don't know that novel, no.
Oh, I'm blanking on the name now, but you know, her lover, she wrote this.
Didn't this just come out or something?
No, but it may have been republished, I don't know.
Came across something like this.
Something, it's one of the strangest books I've ever read. It's about the beginnings of fascism are about to take over an unnamed country, and the war is about to begin, and the people, the protagonist knows that and leaves and tries to go someplace else, and it's about the difficulty of doing that and where she gets to. It's fascinating.
She's actually a very interesting writer, Brian.
Yeah.
I like the historical novels too. I read them years ago.
HDs?
Lord Breyer.
But this is a place where I think we feel science as our overlord, because the replication of the experiment needs to happen in order for it to be true, right? And if you can't replicate the voice coming to you, although you're saying it's coming to you over and over again, so you know what I mean, in this strange way you are. But then that's why the thing that just charged me up when I started reading HD was, have you noticed? And once you start noticing, then you see these forces in, you know, I remember these poor people that were at dinner one night, and we had enough wine, and they said, how did you and Isabel meet? And I sort of tossed up, you want the long story or the short story? And they said, oh, we want every detail. I said, really? And Isabel's going, no, you don't. You know? And I mean, I can literally start in 1968, and one little event after another, it's like little thumps or trim tabs keep jostling us towards us standing, looking at each other in Portugal. And I mean, it's an extraordinary group of angels. I mean, it literally, I mean, one of them was that the second time she came over, and we didn't, at that point, I had no more money. The first thing that happened was that she got called into the university after I had left Portugal the first time. And they said, we screwed up your scholarship, we owe you money. And she wrote to me and said, they just gave me enough money for an air ticket. Should I? And I said, yes. So she came over, and that was in August, and then she went home, and I worked something I never did, extra shifts at the restaurant, which had serious consequences because you were having to, you know, once you start working extra, then I gave you my shift, you know, and there's this give and take, it's some nightmare about politics and stuff. But I did, and we got together enough money to bring her back over the second time. When we were done with that, it was kind of devastating because I didn't have the wherewithal to be able to continue doing that. She had no access to money. And 3 days before she left, I walked out and pulled the mail out of the mailbox, and there was this letter from the Fund for Poetry sitting there. And I was like, what the hell is this? And I opened it up, and it was a decent amount of money. And
what was the Fund for Poetry?
That's what I said. I literally had to go in, my roommate did shares and finance and all that kind of stuff, where you sell short and you know, speculations. And had to have a firm, and I had to go into him and say, George, is this a real check? And he went, Christ, yes, what is this? So then my first phone call was to Tora. He says, Christ, I don't know, cash it. And then I called Bill, and Bill said, congratulations. And it's this, weird anonymous fund. That,
Really?
Yeah. It was like Michael Malone, the Millionaire. Remember that show when you were a kid?
Yeah.
And it's, because I said to Bill, who do I thank? He said, you can't petition, you can't thank. It's just they noticed you were doing stuff.
That's great. That's really great.
And that got me there and met, and allowed us to, because it was getting to the point where can I do this series? Can I live? Can we transatlantic date? This is not the smartest thing to do when you're not, financially able. So it was these strange occurrences of angelic presences that kept coming in and just saying, shh, stop all your fussing, just let us carry you along,
Well, I'm feeling a little as if things are coming round, because I went to Stony Brook from 66 to 68, and George Quasha was my teacher. He brought Denise Levertoff and Robert Creeley and Duncan,
Right.
and, well, Jim Harrison. He wrote me today, he said it's really Jim Harrison who did it, he just did. But, I remember.
Did what? Brought all those people?
Brought them, yeah. And it's almost, and I told him, it's almost as if I've hallucinated that Olson actually gave a reading there, which he didn't. But George was talking about him and corresponding with him and writing a paper about him, and he talked to me about him, and so I thought, well, this is, I suppose that got into my memory. Maybe it was did Olson come? I can't quite remember, but was he really here? No. But that was the transformational time for me, hearing these poets. They became so important.
But in some other sense, Olson actually was there, He was like so there. He's like, Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein had this argument.
Please do.
Huh?
Wittgenstein and Bertrand Russell challenged Wittgenstein. He said about his theories of language, and he said, there's no elephant in this room. And Wittgenstein just laughed, right? Because there was definitely an elephant in the room at that point. What can you say? I mean, we tend to, it's science. I hear what you're saying about science. The interesting thing about H.D. was that her father was a scientist. He was an astronomer at Lehigh University. And she was constantly trying to bring those two modes together in the world.
Well, they should be.
They should be.
One of the greatest things that, I don't know, I'd love to know who did it. In San Francisco, this would have been in the mid-70s, they did a thing called Poetry and Science.
Yeah.
And like Michael McClure and Oppenheimer's brother. Or no, it was not, no, Oppenheimer's brother was with Duncan. Michael McClure had the guy that invented the bubble chamber. I can't, Glasser, I think, Yeah. And it was just, you're together.
Yeah.
That was what they said, you're going to come give a talk. And it was absolutely miraculous. Mr. Duncan called Oppenheimer's brother Honey Bear, which is...
I think that this University of Pennsylvania just published a new book on poetry and science,
Really?
and science and anthology.
See, I think that my students, the people who used to be my students, tell me that science is changing, and that the contemporary scientific developments in physics and stuff have moved beyond the kind of materialist ground that we associate science with because of this
particle and wave.
Yeah, as we're sort of, I mean, actually I think the poets were probably there before them, but we're just catching up in terms of our concept of science and what science is.
My mother wrote a book which will forever be unpublished, I'm afraid, on math as an art form.
Oh.
She was a mathematician and she was a sculptor.
Well, I
And
mean,
she read philosophy and she put all these things together, and since then there have been many books written on the subject. And I'm going to just try to put it online somehow, just so that it doesn't disappear into the void, but it's kind of old-fashioned now.
But that's the way it originally was, right? I mean, if we go back to John Dee, that's my love of John Dee is that they were doing math to conjure angels. You had to be a good mathematician, to do this. But
John Dee within a tree, or is that
that's how I read Law, yeah. But I think the person on the left is Dee. I think Law is on the right. That's the reason I got that.
Really?
That's nice.
Some guys reproduced that. It was like $10 on eBay, and I sat there looking at it, and he described what I've reproduced this. I'm using this paper and these inks because they're just wonderful things. And it was like, yes, thank you for not selling them as originals and having me send it back to you. You know.
I'll tell you something, I wish that Chuck Stein would talk a lot about the discussions he had with Garrett about the afterlife. Because they had many.
Yeah.
They had many, and I used to ask Garrett, but he didn't, you know, he only talked to people like Robert Kelly or the people up in Salem or Chuck Stein, who knew so much more. You know, so it's about a year before Garrett died. He said, I'm thinking about death, and I said, do you know what happens after you die? And he said, I can't tell you.
Oh, yeah?
Which can mean, I don't know, I can't put it into words, or I'm not going to tell you. And then he wouldn't say any more about it, and, you know, I alluded to it several times, but couldn't get much. And then for our discussion group, he came and gave a talk about magic, and I thought he was going to spill the beans much more. But he just gave a little introductory talk, and then he went around the room to the poets and said, so what experiences have you had with magic? I'm interested in hearing about those. So, but
This is
Chuck,
Garrett, right?
this is Garrett, but Chuck really knows a lot about
Oh, yeah.
Garrett's thoughts on the matter.
Well,
Maybe
I
you could get him to write something for the anthology about that.
Well, we'll work on it. He said he would write something. I heard from him.
Good,
Yeah.
good. But you know,
What are we gonna do without Garrett's reading list?
Oh, yeah.
I know.
I was telling, I mean, I relied on Ramen Blazer and Garrett to know
What to read.
what to read.
Well, we're not likely to see people of their ilk again in our lifetime. I think that's the sadness that I feel, you know, because just to be, I mean, the wonderful thing of it could be, the guy testified at the memorial, you could bring anybody up to meet Garrett. And 5 minutes later, they were sitting in the other room just, but, you know, oh, what about this, what about that? And, you know, there was a guy that described bringing his wife who was,
Okay. Thanks for coming.
was she an
Thank you so
economist
much
or
for
something?
coming.
You know?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you
Great.
for being
It's
here.
really exciting.
Lovely to have you.
We
A boat?
We literally have a boat to catch.
Where are you going?
We're going on a boat which our friend has chartered for her 65th wedding, 65th birthday.
Nice.